welcome once again to Let's Start Cooking. I'm Wayne, and tonight we're going to do a classic pot roast. It used to be a special occasion when we were kids, but today, you know what? I understand that beef is expensive, but when you add up what it costs us for this beef, we have a 3-pound chuck roast, and that's about the best thing that you want to use for a pot roast. And we paid $17 for it. So when you think about a 3-pound piece of meat for $17, you couldn't go to a fast food restaurant and order hamburgers and fries for 3 people for $17. So you're gonna get a good meal. And the first thing that we have to do is we're gonna prepare everything before we do the meat, because we wanna make sure our vegetables are ready to go. Now, I already took the liberty. I just took regular carrots and I cut them into about a 1.5 to 2 inch pieces, and that's all we're gonna do with them. We have baby red potatoes. I like to use these because when we're gonna cook this for about 4 hours. And if you got regular potatoes, they're gonna turn to mush on you. So we have the regular whole ones. We're not gonna peel them. We're just gonna use them exactly the way they are. So the first thing that we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna start with an onion. And none of this that we're gonna do is going to be cut very small. These are all gonna be nice sized chunks. Because again, this is gonna cook for about 4 hours, depending on the size of the pot roast that you get. It can be anywhere between 2.5 to 4 hours and maybe longer. I would suggest, like I said, this is 3 pounds. I would suggest that if you go any heavier, if you end up with a 4-pound or a 5-pound, I would add about a half hour to an hour for every pound after that. So what we're gonna do, we're just gonna move this out of the way. We're just gonna cut this, and we're not gonna be careful about it because we want nice sized chunks. We're just gonna cut it up, just like that. Because again, this is gonna cook with the roast, and we don't want to have anything too small, because what's going to happen is if you cut it too small, it's just going to turn the mush in the pot, and you're not going to have those nice bite-sized pieces. And the garlic, we have 4 cloves of garlic, but if you're like me and you have smaller cloves, like some of these are, we're just going to use about 5 or 6 of them. And all we're going to do, break them up so we can get everything off of them. And again, we're not worrying about cutting these up real small. We just want to get everything off. And we're just going to take them and just do that. That's all we're going to do. So I'll get the rest of this cut up and I'll get everything going, and we'll be right back. Now that we have our onions and our garlic that we just put in a bowl here, we've cut it up to the size that we want, and we have our carrots and our potatoes done, what we want to do is we're going to preheat our oven to 300 degrees because we're going to cook this slow, and we're going to cook it on a low heat. And what I did was I took the pot roast that we have, which is a chuck roast, and I just tapped it off with a paper towel, because we don't want, when you're dealing with oil, because we're going to sear this on both sides, and when you're dealing with oil, you don't want to mix water and oil, so you're going to make sure that this is nice and dry. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to take a little bit of salt and pepper, and we're just going to season this just a little bit. And again, this is up to you. You can do this if you want. If you don't like to have that much salt, or you can't have salt, you don't have to do this. But we're going to just season it just a little bit. Salt and pepper. I'm going to turn it over. We're going to do the same thing on this side. All right, once we get that done, what we're going to do now is we're going to heat up our Dutch oven. We're just going to bring our plate right over here. And again, I do this because I'm trying to show that you can make almost anything on a hot plate and one pan. Almost every meal that you've seen me cook, I use the oven once in a while, but I'm sure most of us have an oven at home, so it's not that hard. This is going to be a one-pot meal. So all we're going to do is we're going to heat this pot up, our Dutch oven. We'll get that heated up. And we're going to take olive oil, and I have here about a tablespoon to about a tablespoon and a half, and we're just going to put it in there and let this heat up. Because what we want to do, we want to let this get nice and hot. We're going to sear both sides of this about 2 to 3 minutes per side. and we're gonna get this nice and brown before we go further. So we'll let this heat up, and then we'll sear our chuck roast. Now that we have this nice and hot, we're just gonna take this and carefully, we're gonna lay this in. And we're gonna let this go for about 2 to 3 minutes. We want a nice brown coating across the meat. And we're not gonna play with it, we're just gonna let it cook. And it is a nice sized piece, so we can let this cook for a little bit. We just don't wanna burn it, that's all. Okay, now once we have this done, about 2 to 3 minutes, we're just gonna take it and we're gonna gently flip it over. I'm going to do this side for about 2 to 3 minutes. Now, when you're searing, you want to keep it up nice and high, the temperature, because we don't want to cook the whole thing through. We just want to get a nice sear on the outside. So we're going to let this about 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Once we have this seared on both sides, we're going to leave it right here where it's at. We're just going to turn the temperature down just a hair until we get everything done. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take our onions and our garlic, and we're just going to add it right into our pot, right alongside our roast. That's why I said it's an easy recipe. It's a one-pot wet recipe where you don't have to worry and go nuts, and you're going to dirty every pot and pan in your house. You're not going to have that with this. Put this down nice and easy. We're going to take our beef broth and the red wine. We're just going to put them together. And again, I will have everything that I'm using here, all the ingredients listed in our description. I'm going to take our rosemary and thyme. And we're just going to mix this together a little bit. And we're just going to dump this right over our roast. And what we want to do is we're going to let this simmer now. We're going to bring this up to a simmer. Once it starts to simmer, then we're going to cover it. Then we're going to put it in the oven, and we're going to cook this for 2 hours at 300 degrees. And last but not least, a bay leaf. And like I said, you can put this anywhere. As long as it's in, we're not going to worry about it. Try not to break it up when you put them in, though, because we are going to be taking that back out. But again, we're going to let this simmer, come up to a simmer. Once it starts to simmer, then we can shut this off and we'll put it in the oven. As you can see, now we have a slow simmer going. So what we're going to want to do with this now is we're just going to cover it, and we're not putting our potatoes and we're not putting our carrots in right yet. We want to cook this now for 2 hours before we add this, because if we add this stuff now, these would be mashed potatoes by the time this was done. So we're going to cover this. We're going to put it in our oven at 300 degrees for 2 hours. Okay, we've had this in the oven for 2 hours at 300 degrees. And all we're going to do now is we're going to carefully take this lid off. Let the steam go out so we don't get caught in the face with it. And all we're going to do is now we're going to add our carrots and our potatoes to this. And you can use your hands. We're just going to drop them right in. And now we're just going to put the carrots in, like I said. We're just going to lay these right in. Now, if you are using a smaller chuck roast, you can lower the time by, like, I'd say about a half hour for every pound. Same way as if you're using a bigger one. But we're just going to put this in. What you want to do now is you're going to test with this. You're going to test this after about 2 hours. You're going to start testing it with a fork to see if everything's fork tender. This meat, when this is done though, is going to fall apart on you. So we'll get the lid back on and we'll get it back in the oven for 2 hours. Okay, we've had this in for another 2 hours. And all we have to do now is we're just going to take our lid off. And make sure we don't get steam in our face. And we're just going to make sure, and as you can see, everything is fork soft. And what we're going to do now is, the first thing we want to do is we're going to remove this bay leaf while we see it. And that way it's a lot easier to get to. So we just lay that to the side. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna remove everything out so you can see the roast a little bit easier. And I'll plate it on another plate, and that way you can see everything together. We'll get rid of this broth. Like I said, we're gonna save this, and I'm either gonna make a gravy out of it, or I might just take it, let it cool down, and stick it in your freezer, and then that way I have a good soup starter. As you can see, all we did was we just moved it over. I wanted to show you how tender this was. So we're just gonna take a piece out. I'm gonna try without it falling apart. And as you can see, it's just gonna fall apart. And that's how tender this is. You don't need a knife. It's just gonna fall apart now. And I'm gonna get some of this if I can. And like I said, this is for a 3 pound. That is so tender. You really don't even have to chew that. This is gonna be probably the best meal you can make with really doing hardly anything. You put it into a Dutch oven, you cook it for 4 hours, it falls apart. I really hope you enjoy this video. I hope you like and share with your friends, and I hope you subscribe to our channel. And we will see you next week.